Hey everyone, this video will be on Chapter 4, Research Design, from pages 91 to 126 in our book. In this chapter, we will learn a variety of research designs available to social researchers as well as how to design a study. Since science is all about finding out, scientific inquiry comes down to making observations and interpreting what you've observed. There are two major tasks in any research design. First, you must specify as clearly as possible what it is you want to find out, and second, you must determine the best way to do it. The three purposes of research that the book discusses is exploration, description, and explanation. Much of social research is conducted to explore a topic. This approach typically occurs when a researcher examines a new interest or when the subject of study itself is relatively new. These studies are typically done for three purposes. One, to satisfy the researcher's curiosity and desire for better understanding. Two, to test the feasibility of undertaking a more extensive study. And three, to develop the methods to be employed in any subsequent study. The next type of study we will discuss is description. This is when social science studies aim at describing situations and events. The researcher observes and then describes what was observed. The last purpose of research is explanation. While descriptive studies answer questions of what, where, when, and how, explanatory studies address questions of why. And these explanations can be ideographic or nomothetic. Ideographic explanations seek an exhaustive understanding of the causes producing events and situations in a single or limited number of cases. This conclusion rests on the art of social research, which is achieved primarily through experience, by reading the analysis of others, and by conducting your own. The book mentions a few techniques to consider. It says to pay attention to the explanations offered by the people living in the social processes you are studying, and that it might be insightful to make comparisons with similar situations. Nomothetic explanations stand in contrast to the ideographic model, in which we seek a complete, in-depth understanding of a single case. This model is inherently probabilistic because it is more open to misunderstanding and misinterpretation. The three main criteria for nomothetic causal relationships in social research are: 1, the variables must be correlated; 2, the cause takes place before the effect; and 3, the variables are non-spurious. I will go more in depth on what those mean in a second. So, as I just said, the first criterion for a nomothetic causal relationship in social research says that the variables must be correlated. Correlation is an empirical relationship between two variables such that 1, changes in one are associated with changes in the other, or 2, particular attributes of one variable are associated with particular attributes of the other. Correlation emphasizes the need to base social research assertions on actual observations rather than assumptions. The next criterion is the idea of time order. In order to be nomothetic, the cause must precede the effect in time. Finally, the variables must be non-spurious, which means the effect cannot be explained in terms of some third variable. The next thing the book talks about is necessary and sufficient causes. A necessary cause represents a condition that must be present for the effect to follow. A sufficient cause, on the other hand, represents a condition that, if it is present, guarantees the effect in question. The discovery of a cause that is both necessary and sufficient is, of course, the most satisfying outcome in research. In social research, there is virtually no limit to what or whom can be studied, what we refer to as the units of analysis. The units of analysis are those things we examine in order to create summary descriptions of all such units and to explain differences among them. In social science, the units of analysis are usually individuals, groups, organizations, social interactions, or social artifacts. The book introduces two types of faulty reasoning about units of analysis: the ecological fallacy and reductionism. The ecological fallacy refers to groups or sets of systems, something larger than individuals. It is the assumption that something learned about an ecological unit says something about the individuals making up that unit. This fallacy deals with confusing units of analysis in such a way that we base conclusions about individuals solely on the observation of groups. Although the patterns observed among variables at the level of groups may be genuine, the danger lies in reasoning from the observed attributes of groups to the attributes of the individuals who made up those groups, when we have not actually observed those individuals. The second type of potentially faulty reasoning related to units of analysis is reductionism. This involves attempts to explain a particular phenomenon in terms of limited and/or lower order concepts. Reductionism of any type tends to suggest that particular units of analysis or variables are more relevant than others. It can occur when we use inappropriate units of analysis. Next, the book talks about how time plays many roles in the design and execution of research. Researchers have two options for dealing with the issue of time in the design of their research: cross-sectional studies and longitudinal studies. A cross-sectional study involves observations of a sample of a population or phenomenon that are made at one point in time. Cross-sectional studies usually include studies that are exploratory and descriptive. In contrast to cross-sectional studies, a longitudinal study is designed to permit observations of the same phenomenon over an extended period of time. Many field research projects involving direct observation and perhaps in-depth interviews are naturally longitudinal. These types of studies are often the best way to study changes over time. There are three special types of longitudinal studies that you should know. These include trend studies, cohort studies, and panel studies. A trend study is a type of longitudinal study that examines changes within a population over time. A cohort study is when a researcher examines specific subpopulations as they change over time. Typically, a cohort is an age group, but it can also be some other time grouping. A panel study examines the same set of people each time. Next, we are going to go over how to design a research project. There are many steps to take when designing your own research project. To begin with, you might want to read something about the issue. Before designing your study, you must define the purpose of your project. You might want to ask yourself questions like, what kind of study will you undertake? Exploratory, descriptive, or explanatory? Do you plan to write a research paper to satisfy a course or thesis statement? The next step you'll want to make is to draw meaningful conclusions about concepts such as prejudice, alienation, liberalism, etc. In order to make meaning from them, you first need to clarify what you mean by them, which is an important step in your research. You'll need to specify exact meanings for all other concepts you plan to study. If you want to include surveys and experiments in your research, such concepts must be specified in advance. you need to decide on your measurement technique. The meaning of variables in a study is determined in part by how they are measured. Part of the task here is deciding how the desired data will be collected by direct observation, review of official documents, a questionnaire, etc. In addition to refining concepts and measurements, you must decide whom or what to study. The population for a study is that group, usually of people, about whom we want to draw conclusions. Because we are almost never able to study all the members of a population, you must select a sample from among the data that might be collected and studied. Having decided what to study among whom by what method, you're now ready to make observations. You must collect empirical data for your research. The next step is data processing. Depending on the research method chosen, you'll have amassed a volume of observations in a form that probably isn't immediately interpretable. For example, if you've collected a survey, you might have many raw observations. The data processing phase for a survey typically involves the classification or coding of written in answers and the transfer of all information to a computer. Once the collected data are in a suitable form, you're ready to interpret them for the purpose of drawing conclusions that reflect the interests, ideas, and theories that initiated the inquiry. The final stage of the research process involves the uses made of the research you've conducted and the conclusions you've reached. To start, you'll probably want to communicate your findings so that others will know what you've learned. You may want to prepare or even publish a written report. Be sure to consider what your work suggests in regard to further research on your subject. You may want to ask yourself what mistakes should be corrected in future studies, what avenues opened up in your study should be pursued further. Now you're ready to make a research proposal. A research proposal provides a preview of why a study will be undertaken and how it will be conducted. Elements of a research proposal include an objective, literature review, subjects for study, measurement, data collection methods, analysis, schedule, budget, and possibly an institutional review board. The first element that the book discusses is the problem or objective. What exactly do you want to study? Why is it worth studying? Next is literature review. What have others said about this topic? What theories address it and what do they say? What previous research exists? As I mentioned earlier, you will need to come up with subjects for study. Whom or what will you study in order to collect data? You will also determine what the key variables are in your study and how you will define and measure them. You will need to consider data collection methods. How will you actually collect the data for your study? After collecting data, you'll need to analyze the findings. Indicate the kind of analysis you plan to conduct. Spell out the purpose and logic for your analysis. Make sure to provide a schedule for the various stages of research so you can keep track of how you're doing. You also need to provide a budget that specifies where the money will go, even if you're funding your own research. Depending on the nature of your research design, you may need to submit your proposal to the campus institutional review board for approval to ensure the protection of human subjects.